Hello and welcome back to The Next Step. Today I'm going to tell you how to turn your pitch into a story. Now, why a story? Because human beings have been telling stories for as long as we could speak. Maybe 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 years we've been telling stories. Your parents told you stories when you were a tiny little baby. Your parents read you books that were stories when you were a toddler. Right? You learned how to read by reading stories. This is what human beings do. And the pitch that I taught you before, that 10, 12, 15 slide pitch, well, yes, it is a story, but it's not the compelling kind of story. Now, if I sit you down and I say, once upon a time, then you just expect that I'm going to tell you a fairy tale. That's how fairy tales start. And instead, if I say, it was a dark and stormy night, well, now you're expecting a mystery. And if I say, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, you're now expecting a spaceship to fly over my head. Right? You know these stories. This is what we're built for. And the trick is to turn your business idea into a story you can share. Now, the problem in doing this is that they didn't really teach you how to do this at school. Right? So 5 billion people have been taught on this planet how to write an essay, and maybe a few thousand of them have been taught how to write a story, a compelling story. Right? You're going to be one of those people by the time you get through with this lesson. So to start with this, let's go turn to someone who really knows how to write a story. His name's Kurt Vonnegut. He's the author of a lot of books, but his most famous is Slaughterhouse-Five. And he has a theory that he's shared to the world that all stories have shapes to them. Right? So here's a diagram of the shape of stories. It's got two axes. The horizontal axis is time. Stories take place over time, and then they go up and down, and that is kind of the feelings of the main character, right? So when they're up, the character's doing great. When it's down, the character's not doing so well. Now, according to Kurt Vonnegut, there are really just three main structures, three shapes to the most popular stories. I'll tell you about the Man in Hole in a second. Let's just go to Boy Meets Girl. You've seen this one before. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back, right? This has been made into movies hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times. Or Cinderella. You meet the main character, things start looking bad, but then all of a sudden things turn around and they get better and better and better. Here, first there's slippers, and then there's a dress, and then there's a carriage, and then she's brought to the ball, and then midnight strikes, and everything falls apart. But before you know it, Prince Charming has come along and everything is great. Now, those two you don't have to worry about, because for stories about companies, we just have to focus on Man in Hole. And here's how it goes. Meet this character. Character could be you, could be your customers, could be the world, could be community. You know, it's up to you, it's up to the story. They have a problem, right? Your business exists to solve a problem. Well, that's where the hole comes in. That is the part of the story that drops this character into a hole. But it's not a problem because there's a way out. There's a solution that pulls this character out of that hole. And that is what you're bringing to market. And at the end, the audience is happy to see this character who they've now come to like get pulled out of the hole and brought back into the real world, into a better world, right? So that is the structure that you need to think about. Who's your character? What is the hole that they've fallen into? And how do they get out? Now, that said, the biggest mistake that people make when I teach them this is they think, well, if one hole is good, two holes is better. The structure of their first drafts tend to be, here's somebody, and here's the problem that they have. But it's not a problem. I have a great solution for them. In fact, they have this other problem too. And my solution solves that too. And maybe even a third problem they have. And my solution solves that too. But you know what? That doesn't make the story more compelling. It makes it less compelling. Tell them, pick one problem, put the characters in one hole, and then pull them out, and everyone will be a lot happier with you. Now, the second mistake that people make when I teach them how to do this is that their first draft looks and feels and sounds just like an essay that they wrote in school. And I can tell you that essays do not make for compelling stories. For example, here's Herve. Hervé is an amazing entrepreneur from Rwanda. And when I asked him to write down his story, this is what he wrote. Hello, my name is Hervé. I'll skip his last name. I'm from Rwanda in East Africa. In my country, we are 13 million people, 90% living by agriculture, 60% under the poverty line. In rural areas, 70% of these farmers own at least one livestock, a goat, sheep, pork, rabbit, or cattle. Now, when I read that to you, do you know what the next line is? More importantly, do you care what the next line is? And that's the point. If you're not grabbing the audience and making them want to hear the next line and the next piece of information, then you're not telling a compelling story. Again, there's nothing you can do to fix these words in this order to make it compelling. Facts are not compelling. There is no way to take this essay, change a few words around, and make it compelling. Instead, we have to throw it away and we have to move it to Hollywood, California. And I don't mean that physically, right? Hollywood, California is the home of the movies. It's the home of TV shows. It is the place on earth that writes the most stories. So how would Hollywood tell the story of Paniel Meat Processing? That's Hervé's company in Rwanda. Well, they certainly wouldn't do it with facts, right? They would do it with some gimmick, some way to grab the audience's attention and pull them in. So rather than me just tell you how that works, let me just show you a few of the tricks that we've used on stage at Fledge, at my accelerators with my entrepreneurs. So you're like a 21st century, you're like Bloomberg of Africa.
I mean, you could say that.
Yeah, okay. And we will.
All destined by the rules of Mother Nature to turn to dust from rust.
The simple act of pouring used cooking oil down the drain is literally and quietly killing people.
Tonight, the conversation between Brian and Ashley will end in tears. But tomorrow, something else will happen.
This is not a story of 15 women or 150 women. This is a story of 15 million women in rural Tanzania.
So how did we get to those stories? Well, I'll tell you, strangely enough, we did not start at the beginning. We did not sit down and write compelling opening lines and then fill in the rest. Instead, we thought about how we should structure this story. We knew it was going to be Man in Whole, so we said, well, what's the problem? What is the biggest problem we can talk about? And how does the solution relate to that specific problem? Who should we talk about? And then how should it flow together? Right? And so we started really in the middle. We began in the middle of the story and worked our way out. And once we had a few drafts of this story down, then we would figure out which was the most compelling opening line and pull it to the front. Now, the secret then is doing multiple versions. This is not the kind of thing where you're going to sit down with a blank sheet of paper and an hour or 2 or 8 hours later have a finished story. Storytelling doesn't work that way. Storytelling is an incredibly creative process. And whenever you're tasked with a creative process, there's a process for being creative. It goes like this. You're going to make at least 3 versions of everything you write. First thing you do is take that blank sheet of paper and write down a first draft. Right? The same thing you would do in school. Write down your best work, put it down, do it quickly. It's just a first draft. And then the key is put it aside. Forget that it exists. Forget the ideas that you've put down on that paper. Take out a new sheet of paper, or of course, a new document on your word processor, and try again. Now do a second version. Don't look at the first version. Don't think about what you did the first time. Just do something different. And when you're done with that, put it aside. So here's the trick. You now have 2 perfectly good first drafts. And you are now free to do anything you want. You are free to go wild. You are free to do things that make no sense. Right? So that's it. Put down a new sheet of paper in front of you and go wild. Now, go as wild as you want, as many times as you want. You're free to do that. You have 2 safe copies. When you're all done, now put all those sheets back in front of you, look them all over and start combining the ideas together. And I'll bet you what happens is something in that wild idea gets merged into version 1. Pieces of version 2 get merged into version 1. And what comes out of this process is something that's way better than either version 1 or version 2 or version 3. I've seen this done dozens of times, and that's usually what happens. Now, it's hard to show you in this quick video how to do this with text, so let me give you an example of some logos. On the left is the Jolex logo when I first met them, and I gotta say, it's not my favorite logo. We started iterating on their logos. This is a fledgling, and a few weeks into the program, we get to the part where we talk about names and logos. And there was another company in that program that had this star logo, or something kind of like this star logo. And I liked it, but they were actually not going to use it. So I grabbed it for Jolex, and I changed the colors, and I added a little bit more stars to it, and that little ring in the middle. Threw some text on the bottom. That was version 1, and unfortunately, I can't show you version 2 and version 3 and version 4 and version 5 because I didn't save them. But in the end, what we wound up with is the one on the right. And as you can see, it's kind of in the same family. It's nothing like the one on the left. It's something like the one in the middle. Right? But the point is that we iterated over this, and we came up with a bunch of ideas and merged them together. And the end is so much different than what it started out with. Now, one of my favorite cartoonists is Hugh MacLeod. He does cartoons on the back of business cards. And it's not the pictures that I like, it's the sayings that go along with them. And this is one of my favorites, right? I think I've shown this before in my videos. All good ideas must die so that great ideas might live. And a lot of people get hung up on their good ideas. A lot of people like their first drafts, like those ideas that they put into those first drafts. Otherwise, they wouldn't have written them when I asked them to do a first draft, right? Their best work. But nonetheless, sometimes the best ideas are not your first work. Usually, it's not the best ideas are not what you first put down. Usually, the great ideas come from having a lot of different ideas thrown around. There's one great example. I talk about it in the book, right? You should read the text that goes along with these videos because I talk about Zirconia in there, who in their first draft delivered one of the most boring essays I've ever seen. And in their second draft, once we got past that, delivered one really boring story, right? It just wasn't compelling. It wasn't delivered well. The words weren't quite right. And we kept at this. Every day I would ask the entrepreneur to write a new version, and every day I'd get back a different version, and it still wasn't any good. Until one day he walks in with a piece of poetry. It was unbelievable. And again, the text is in the book. And then we iterated on it, and unfortunately we lost some of the poetry in the final version. But still, you can see how much better it pops. You can just see the story. I suggest you go and watch it online.
The foundation of our modern world, of our industrial world, is steel. Take some iron and add a little carbon, and you get steel. Strong enough and pliable enough to build bridges, railroads, factories, and ships. All destined by the rules of Mother Nature to turn to dust from rust.
All right, one technique that we use in a lot of these stories to help make them better is suspense. Now, that's a really cheesy version of it, but really, the idea is that you deliver some evocative line or some interesting fact or statement where the audience wants to know what comes next. And really, that doesn't happen in the normal pitch, right? You may think it does when you say, imagine a world that's such and such, but it really doesn't. When you make a story, though, you can totally grab onto the cliches and the tropes and the other pieces that we're used to in stories and make them sound suspenseful and actually be suspenseful. As you watch other fledglings tell their stories, and they're all online, you can go to youtube.com/FledgeLLC to see all the Fledge stories. Keep an eye open for how often we use suspense. My best and favorite example of this actually comes from Steve Jobs. So if you go back and watch his presentation in 2007 when he introduced the iPhone, he made the most suspenseful opening I've ever seen, right, in one of these presentations, right? So we knew the iPhone was coming. Everyone knew the iPhone was coming, but nobody knew what it looked like. Nobody knew what it was going to do. And it's hard to remember, but there was no touchscreen phone like it at the time. It was just something completely new. So what's Steve do? He steps up on stage. He says, and one more thing, because the iPods were the big business back then. And the one more thing is not one more thing. He tells us it's three more things. It's a touchscreen iPod. Oh my God, that would be great. It's a breakthrough phone. Yeah, we know, we've been waiting for that. And it's a wireless internet device. Okay, great. They're going to show us three new things. But then Steve repeats that. Tonight I'm going to show you a touchscreen iPod, a brand new phone, and an internet device. And he repeats it a third time. And then everybody in the audience gets the joke, right? The joke of his presentation, the suspense in the presentation is it's not three devices. It's really one device. But then he takes it one step further. He shows a picture, and it's not the iPhone. He shows a joke picture. He shows one of the mock-ups that someone had put on the internet of an iPod with its touch wheel and a rotary phone entry. Right? He had us on the edge of the seat, waiting to see what this was going to be, and then didn't show it to us. And then, held on for just a little bit longer till finally he gave in and he broke the suspense and he showed us what this was like. Now, you're not as famous as Steve Jobs. You don't have the following of Steve Jobs. You can't quite get away with that, but you can get away with that element in your storytelling, and it will help.
This is a love story between bees, farmers, and family.
My name is Bakar, and I come from post-Soviet country, Georgia, where freedom of speech sometimes is considered as a luxury.
Are you kidding me? These are their only options? Ashley and Brian are sitting at their kitchen table, and they are totally overwhelmed. The problem is they just figured out that the cost of childcare for their baby Mason is more than their monthly mortgage. Heck, it's even more than they paid for college.
Oh no! Oh no! It's happening again? Says Joe, a city restaurant chef prepping for dinner in the central business district of Nairobi, Kenya. It's raining outside, and Joe just realized sewer water is seeping into the back of his restaurant kitchen for the 4th time this month.
How does one company solve the problems of poverty, hunger, and food safety, and yet all it does is growing fresh fruits and vegetables?
Now, what makes these great is that the audience now wants to know more. And then you deliver the rest of the story in the middle. And then at the end, you need a closing line. So what do? Well, you don't just say thank you and walk off. That is absolutely what you never do. And the reason for that is you want to be memorable. You want the audience to remember you as the guy who had the chef's hat on, or the guy who likes financial services, or any of those opening lines that evoke some attention. Well, what you can do in the closing line is simply repeat the opening line verbatim. That's one thing that often works. Sometimes not, though. Sometimes what you need to do is riff on that opening line. Remind them what it was by saying something that was similar to it. So again, let me go show you some examples of closing lines.
Now, Mason's going to get the best quality childcare available. And Ashley, she's going to keep her job, which for her means that she's going to earn $2 million more in her lifetime. And she'll maintain her path to partner. Maybe become a lawyer, maybe become a judge, or even a congresswoman. At BridgeCare Finance, we are changing the conversation at tables everywhere. And that is changing everything. Join us.
Used cooking oil turns into used cooking oil. It is not waste. It eventually loses value to the restaurant, but gains value to the world when it is turned into clean, renewable fuel. Zijani is making that happen in East Africa by giving a second life to used cooking oil. If you would like to work with us in that vision, we would love to talk to you. Thank you.
You go to all these institutions and help save the billions of dollars that we would otherwise have to pay while preserving the environment, keeping the lights on, and keeping the bridges standing above the rivers instead of falling down into them. Best of all, you give my children and yours the affordable, long-lasting, non-toxic infrastructure they deserve to inherit. Zirconia is the end of rust. Thank you.
Great. Now you understand the framework of your story. One more thing you have to worry about is what you sound like to the audience. What you don't want to sound like is that you're reading a script or reading a storybook to them, right? That doesn't play as well as sounding like you are telling them the story, that you're having a conversation with them. Hopefully that sounds like what I'm doing right now, because there's no script in front of me. There's just one line on the screen for my memory, and it says spoken English. All right, so what do I mean by this? Well, there's a difference between spoken English and written English. And again, what your teacher taught you at school is formal written English. She taught you where to put commas. She taught you not to do run-on sentences. She taught you how to use proper phrasing and verbs and whatnot, and grammar, and all the gobbledygook that goes with proper written English. And I want you to forget all that. I want you to not write down proper formal English, because that's not what people sound like when they're speaking to each other. They sound much more relaxed and much more genuine. You need to sound genuine. All right, so there's 3 ways to do this. The first way, and the way that guarantees that you won't sound like you're reading a script, is not to ever write down a script. To write a story, but only do it verbally. And this is how I do my stories, right? So I speak at Demo Day at Fledge, at least once a year. I speak in front of my MBA students in my classes. I don't have any script I'm reading to them, right? I don't actually write down what I'm going to say. Instead, when I'm doing a Demo Day presentation or one of these formal talks, I will write it by walking around my neighborhood. I happen to walk to work, so I will write it as I walk down the hill and up the hill back and forth to work. And I will keep iterating on what I'm saying just as if I were writing it down and editing it there, but I never write it down. I just do it in my head, and I do it speaking out loud. And yes, that makes me look a little bit crazy at times. So sometimes if I'm in a crowded neighborhood, I might actually put in my headset from my phone. So people are thinking I'm speaking on the phone. I'm not. I'm actually just writing a script. All right, so that's one way to do it. Second way is to, again, not write down a script, just write down an outline of a script. All right, write down the major points that you want to say, and then hold this paper in front of you or a tablet in front of you and speak. Right? Speak on those topics. And once you've done that a few times, try them in different orders, do all the editing that you would normally do. Bring out a coach, right? Bring out a friend, speak it in front of them, practice it and edit it and whatnot, and it won't sound written because it's not written. You'll never get hung up on exactly what word to say because there's no words written down to say. And you won't get hung up exactly on the order because you've played around with it enough to fix that. Now, the third way, and the most common way to do this, is to write down a script. Most people can't do those first 2 or don't want to do those first 2 techniques. So they write down their script in English on a sheet of paper, or Spanish, or French, or German, whatever language you're doing this in. We'll just say English for common sake. So they write down their script, and what I will do if I'm the coach is I will initially just take it and put it on separate lines and take out the sentence structures and fix it so that it sounds more like spoken English than written English. All right, next thing I will do to help them, and what they should do, is to repeat it out loud as many times as they can. Don't edit it written down. Edit it if you're going to write the words. Immediately turn around and say those words in your head, or even better, say them out loud to hear whether it sounds like a script or not. And the third thing to do when all those break down and when you're stuck like late at night writing some text is to simply take the sheet of paper and start saying it over and over again. And when you do this, don't get hung up on the specific words that were written down. To say the concepts that are written without trying to say verbatim what words are on that script. This is really important. I've seen over and over again entrepreneurs who love their script, who get hung up on a word, and when they miss a word, they get flustered, and the next minute of their presentation is them being frustrated, visibly and and obviously frustrated because they missed a word, where the word wasn't important, the concept was important. Now you get over this by repeating this. As I said in the section on pitches, you should expect to practice your pitch 30 times or so. Well, the same thing's true with stories, maybe more so, right? 30, 40, 50 times you should be repeating these stories until they feel comfortable, right? If I asked you to tell the story of the 3 pigs, you don't have to go to a storybook to tell that. You can just tell the story. It's in you. And the same thing needs to be true of your story. You should be able to just step up and at any point just start speaking it at any point of the story. Just start speaking it. All right, lastly, I haven't said anything about slides. Where are the slides in all this? Well, the answer is don't worry about slides. Not until you have a story that you think is done. And what I mean by done is that you have told this story to as many outsiders, as many others as possible. And every time that you've told this story, they don't just say that's great. You push them until they give you some critical feedback. Right? The great part is nice. It's nice to hear. But what you want from someone who's not heard this story before is some way to make it better. You want to know what to add or what to subtract. What did you spend too much time on? What did you not spend enough time on? Did they understand the character arc? Did they understand how the character got out of the hole and so forth? Right? Ask them for a critical feedback. They'll give it to you. All right. So when it's done, when you think you have a story that's ready to be presented in front of an audience, then and only then do you work on slides. Right? And so what you do for slides is find a bunch of images that go along with what you're talking about. And images, right? So when you look at those Fledge videos, you'll see images go all the way to the edges of the screen in most of those presentations. Right? There's no need for a border. Or borders don't add anything to the conveyance of the image. Other thing you'll see is words, right? That take up words or numbers that are this big across the screen. You'll see the same thing in Steve Jobs' presentations if you go watch his. Right? So if I say 15 something somethings, then I want to make sure the audience knows that it's a 1, 5, and whatever the units are, not 5, 0. And so I'll put 15 in 200 or 300 point font, and underneath it in much smaller font, whatever the units are. Right? Or if it's 300 million, I'll make 300 million across the screen to scream to the audience that it's a big number. Or 3 billion, or 3 trillion, or 5 trillion, or whatnot. Right? That's a good use of the screen to help add to what you're saying. Right? I will never fill the screen with text if I'm telling a story, because I don't want the audience reading the text. I want the audience listening to me telling the story. Right? And here we are in the 21st century when I say pictures and slides and whatnot. Well, those slides might be themselves videos. We've done this over and over again in Fledge when we do our storytelling on stage. We'll often do a little video, 30 seconds, 45 seconds at the beginning of the story. And it's amazing how 30 seconds of video can totally set the mood of an audience. We can make the audience hungry. We can make the audience sad. We can make the audience excited in 30 seconds with a little bit of music and just the right video, just the right images. Right? Moving images, video images, whatnot. We've also used video in the middle of the story behind the speaker. Silent video, no sound. And so in this case, what helps to convey is how does the product work? How does the solution work? Or who are these people with the problem? Right? You can convey those messages in video in seconds, whereas they would take a minute or two to describe in verbal form. And lastly, on a rare occasion, we'll put a video at the end. The reason we try not to put videos at the end is there's often this awkward 1-second pause between the time someone speaks and the time the video starts playing. That doesn't add to your storytelling abilities. It doesn't make the audience feel great. Awkward pauses are bad. But occasionally we'll do it, and we'll only do it when it really punches home the story that we're trying to tell or the feeling we're trying to convey. Right? If that's the best ending to pull the whole thing together, then yeah, by all means, put a video at the end. Now, when do you tell these stories? Right? What's the whole point of this? Well, anytime you're asked to come up in front of an audience and tell them what you do, you should be telling them a story instead of a pitch. Unless, and only unless, they are totally expecting the standard 10, 12, 15 slide pitch. And even then, even if it's an angel group and they need to hear those 10 topics, what you should still do is wrap it around a story, right? To use these storytelling techniques in this 5, 6, 10-minute story that you craft using these lessons, to then pull that into the opening of your pitch or the middle of your pitch, and you will stand out. And oh my God, have I seen this over the years when the fledglings go out into the world, when they're done with me or my other fledged partners anywhere in the world, and they go back out into the world and they're invited to go pitch somewhere, we get messages from the organizers of those events saying, wow, you have the most amazing entrepreneurs. And yes, we do have the most amazing entrepreneurs, but we also have taught them over the course of weeks how to stand up in front of an audience and tell an amazing story. And it really does work, right? They win contests, they get investment, they get customers. It really does work. So now what you can do is take a blank sheet of paper, figure out who your character is, what hole they're going to fall into, how they get out again, write yourself your first story, and then remember, put it aside and do it again, right? And do it again and do it again and make it better and better and better. And that is how you tell a great story.